He stole what belonged to the gods. The veil ignited the moment he touched her, not by fire, not by any human hand, but by something older and angrier. The white ceremonial veil, woven only for the wives of prophets, was supposed to shimmer under moonlight. Instead, as King Shamir of Karghadan draped it across Yeria's shoulders, it darkened, curled, and turned to ash in seconds. In the dead silence of the Temple of Kor, the act struck like blasphemy carved into the sky. And yet, Shamir smiled. To the people of Karghadan, King Shamir was once the flame that united the dust, a ruthless unifier, the first man in 100 years to conquer the fractured desert tribes. He was young when he ascended, born of fire and victory. But victory had a scent he couldn't forget. And tonight, he wanted more than power. He wanted her. Yeria, widow of the late prophet Kor. A woman not merely sacred, but believed to be sanctified property of the gods, never to be touched, remarried, or spoken to without ritual. She stood beneath the temple's cracked dome like a bloodless statue, dressed in white, crowned in silence. Her eyes did not meet his, not once, not during the rites, not during the chants that faltered into murmurs when the veil vanished in smoke. Not even when the high priests lowered their eyes and began leaving, one by one. Shamir saw the fear. He mistook it for awe. "Let them turn their backs," he said aloud, voice echoing in stone. "Let them clutch their gods and tremble. I am the one who bleeds and builds, and she." He reached for Yeria's hand, cold. She belongs to the living now. She did not flinch. She didn't speak. And somehow that terrified him more than screams. The high priest Salama, Shamir's former mentor, stepped forward last. Old, blind. His fingers searched the air until they found Shamir's sleeve. His grip was light, but his voice cut like obsidian. "You took what was never yours. The sky will not strike you, Shamir, but it will take from you, limb by limb, name by name, until no one remembers the sound of your voice." Shamir laughed. He turned back toward the throne, toward the guests who no longer bowed, toward the nobles shifting in uneasy silence. But the laugh didn't reach his eyes. And Yeria, she remained still, watching nothing. A hollow space inside a white dress, standing where a soul should have been. That night there were no cheers, no feasts, no songs. Only the distant sound of hooves leaving the temple in silence. And in the heart of Karghadan, something shifted. A crown had just cracked. And its owner hadn't felt the blood begin to drip yet. The man who still thought they feared him. 3 days after the wedding, the temple bells rang, but no one entered the palace. And yet King Shamir still waited for visitors, in his finest robes, at the top of the stairs, alone. He stood by the palace gate for hours, draped in red and gold, sword polished, the desert sun dancing off his crown. Behind him, the servants kept glancing up the staircase, unsure whether they should remind the king that no one had accepted his invitations, that no nobles, priests, or generals had arrived for the cleansing feast, an ancient ritual to bless royal unions. Shamir pretended not to notice. He held his chin high, fingers drumming against the gold lion on his belt. And when Yeria appeared at the edge of the hallway, wrapped in a pale grey cloak, not even the ceremonial white, he forced a grin. "They're late," he muttered. "They'll come when they realize I haven't fallen. I am still their king." Yeria said nothing. She turned and walked back into the stone corridors. Her feet were bare, The sound echoed like footsteps through a tomb. In the following days, something more disturbing settled into the city. Polite silence. No mobs, no rebellion. But also no eye contact, no processions, no names spoken aloud. At court, ministers presented scrolls without names. The royal seal was removed from all official letters. And in the House of Storms, Karghadan's highest council, the king's throne was quietly pushed back against the wall. When Shamir entered, no one stood, no one knelt. They bowed their heads slightly, as if acknowledging the shadow of a title that no longer mattered. He forced himself to speak. Karghadan still breathes, and so do I. The prophet is dust, and I have claimed what was left behind. That makes it mine, doesn't it? A councillor flinched, but didn't answer. Another scribbled a note without looking up. The high priest Salama was absent. That night, Shamir stood in the Hall of Mirrors. 17 gilded panels once reflected his victories, his coronation, his battles, his wedding. Now in their surfaces he saw something else. Himself aged, hollow-eyed, a face uncertain of its own authority. The mirror didn't distort him, it revealed him. "They're afraid," he whispered. "That's why they won't speak. They fear I've risen beyond their grasp." But the silence in the hall disagreed. He still wore the crown, but it was no longer heavy with gold. It was heavy with absence. Absence of worship, absence of fear, absence of loyalty. The crown without a name. No one told him he'd been removed. He found out when the statues started blinking. It began subtly. A new coin was minted, its face blank. A royal decree was posted across the city without his seal. And at the Festival of Winds, where every year the king walked before the people to receive their blessings, the path was swept, the incense burned. But no one summoned him. He waited anyway. Dressed in ceremonial armor, Shamir stood behind the great gates, listening. Listening for horns, for chants, for footsteps. But the city square remained strangely quiet, even though smoke curled in the distance. "Begin the procession," he ordered. No one moved. A guard shifted uncomfortably. The priest said the wind has chosen a different path this year. And who gave them permission to change it? His voice cracked, not in rage, but confusion. The answer came not in words, but in the way the gate stayed closed. Later that night, wandering through the royal archives, Shamir discovered something worse than betrayal. He opened the Book of Lineage, a sacred record of every ruler since the founding of Karghadan, and flipped to his name. It wasn't there, not misspelled, not replaced, gone. The space between the two previous rulers was sealed with wax, as if nothing had existed between them. His hand trembled. "They didn't kill me, they made me unimportant." The next morning, one of his servants, an old man who had served the palace since before Shamir's reign, bowed incorrectly. Not low enough, not slow enough. Shamir stopped him. "What am I to you, Barash?" The man's eyes glistened. I don't know what to call you anymore, my king." Shamir stepped back, not from offense, but from a realization he hadn't wanted to name. He wasn't hated. He wasn't feared. He was being forgotten. Power, he once thought, was something you held. But it turns out, it's only real if others agree to see it. And now they'd all chosen not to look. The king who couldn't find his shadow. They sealed the windows. They barred the doors, and they told no one where the king was kept. because silence was cheaper than execution. The royal suite was no longer a palace. It had become a tomb. The curtains were sewn shut with gold thread. The guards rotated every 3 hours, never speaking. And the floor, the once polished marble that bore the boots of kings, was now cracked and stained, not with dust, but with something darker. Something that bled once and never dried. Shamir was not shackled. He wasn't chained. He was simply placed in a space where no voice could escape, no mirror would reflect, and no word dared to call him king. His meals came through a slit in the stone. No faces, no greetings, just cold bread, water, and silence. He spoke to the walls. "My name is Shamir," he whispered once. "I was the flame of Karghadan." The stone gave no reply. A week passed, then 2. He tried to pray, but the words turned sour in his mouth. He tried to write, but the ink froze under his fingers. And one night, in desperation or madness, he bit into his own hand and began drawing on the wall with his blood. Names, places, victories. They will remember me. They will remember me. The blood faded by morning. In the 3rd week, he heard laughter, a child's laughter, faint and eerie. He followed the sound through the corridor, only to find the hall of echoes, a room that mimicked forgotten noises. There on the floor lay a mirror cracked into 7 pieces. He looked into it. No reflection. Instead, on one shard, he saw a pool of blood slowly spreading across marble. On another area, standing motionless beneath a tree of bones. On the final shard, himself with no eyes, he smashed them all. "If they want me gone, they'll have to bury me themselves." He screamed, but no one came. Only his voice bouncing back, twisted and broken. The next day he awoke to find a single object placed in the center of the room, a dagger. No note, no threat, just an option. He didn't touch it, but he sat beside it for hours. "Even this, they want me to do for them." He laughed, a dry, bitter sound. And as night fell, he whispered one final time, "If I'm already dead, then let me haunt them in silence." Kings die in history books, Shamir. He died in a room where the walls forgot to echo his name. The man who bled to be remembered. Some men pray for mercy, some for justice. But Shamir, he prayed that his name would rot too slow for history to ignore. 3 days. That's how long he sat beside the dagger, watching it, cursing it, laughing at it. Then on the 4th he sharpened it, not for his throat, but for the wall. He sliced open the tip of his finger, dipped it in blood, and began to write. Not in neat script, but in symbols etched like ancient curses. The name Shamir, carved 7 times. The phrase, "I ruled the dust." And finally, I was taken, not lost. Each day he reopened the wound, tracing deeper. The stone began to drink it in, and the words, somehow, didn't fade. It wasn't enough. So he tore strips from his robe, wrapped them in dried herbs from the food tray, and lit a fire under the floor vent, smoke crawling through the cracks of the palace. Somewhere, someone must have seen it. Because the bread stopped coming. That night, starving and feverish, he hallucinated a boy's silhouette watching from the wall. "Are you a ghost?" Shamir whispered. The boy didn't answer, just placed something on the floor and vanished. In the morning, there it was, a scrap of parchment, old, creased, a copy of the Book of Lineage, except now his name was written back in red ink. Only 2 words, still breathing. Shamir pressed the page to his chest like a relic. Something stirred, something bitter and bright. "If I must die, then let it be noisy," he muttered. "Let my blood stain their records. Let the gods choke on my name." That evening, he carved a final phrase into the stone above his bed. "If silence is your punishment, then I will make memory my rebellion." The man they tried to erase had found his weapon. It wasn't steel, it was story. The king who was torn to be forgotten. They didn't want to kill him. They wanted the world to forget he ever bled. The door to his chamber opened at dusk. No word, no summons. Just the creaking of rusted hinges and 4 faceless guards in bone-white cloaks. Shamir stood, not in defiance, not in surrender, but in clarity. "So, you've remembered I exist." They said nothing. They shackled his wrists in cloth, not iron, because iron clanked, and this death needed no noise. They blindfolded him, but his own feet knew the way. They led him down a corridor he once built, past a garden he had planted with his mother, through halls that once held his coronation banners. Now stripped bare, the walk took hours, or maybe just minutes. Time had started to drown itself, but when the blindfold came off, he was standing beneath the sky, not in the palace, but the plaza of dust, the execution ground of ancient Karghadan. It was midnight. Thousands watched in silence, and in the center, 4 white horses were tied to posts. A square of blood-soaked sand waited at his feet, and in front of him, Yeria. She wasn't crying. She wasn't radiant. She was simply there, wearing the same grey cloak from their wedding night. Her hands were wrapped in white cloth. She didn't look at him. "Is this what they've made you?" he asked softly. She didn't answer, but she raised one hand and placed a small bundle of fabric at his feet, the same veil that had burned to ash on their wedding day. Except now it was whole again. White, untouched. "You never touched me," she finally said. "But you touched what wasn't yours to claim." Shamir swallowed something sharp in his throat. Regret. No, it was too late for that. But grief. Grief still had time to whisper. The high priest Salama, blind as always, stepped forward with a scroll. For sacrilege against the sacred. For theft of what was never meant to be held. For trying to outlive the gods. He paused. "You will be torn as a lesson. Not to others, but to the sky itself." The sentence was already engraved in the stone beneath Shamir's feet, written in blood, his own blood from months ago. The ritual began. His limbs were tied to each of the 4 horses, not by rope, but by strips of red linen soaked in sheep's milk and ash, meant to bind not just flesh, but soul. The crowd did not cheer. This wasn't entertainment. It was penance, performed by proxy. And when the drums began, low, funereal, like a heartbeat slowing down, the horses did not bolt. They walked, slowly, gently, until his arms stretched, until bone creaked like wood in a storm, until skin opened with the sound of wet cloth tearing. And still, he did not scream. He looked up, at the sky, at the stars that had refused to fall for him. "Do you see me now?" he whispered. "You tried to silence me. But even torn, I speak." His chest split, his heart stopped. But before it was over, before the final pull, his lips moved one last time. "I was the king of your silence. And now I am the echo you cannot bury." At dawn there was no body to bury, only sand, stained red in 4 directions. and a silence heavier than death. The silence that didn't end. They buried nothing, but something still refused to stay underground. Dawn came, but it didn't burn away the night. The city of Karghadan awoke to a strange stillness, not mourning, not relief. Just a kind of suspended breath. People swept the market floors but didn't speak. The bells rang at the temples, but no one chanted. And beneath every doorstep, a stain remained on the stone. Some said it was just dew. Others swore it was blood that wouldn't wash. In the council hall, ministers resumed their duties. Orders were signed, scrolls sealed, borders redrawn. But the space where the king's name once sat on every page remained blank. And still, they didn't dare write someone else's name in. Best not to speak of it, one muttered. What's gone should stay gone. But gone things don't always stay quiet. 3 days later, a child in the outer district woke screaming in the night. His mother rushed in and found the boy pointing to the window. He was standing there, the child cried, with no arms, but his mouth moved. She dismissed it as nightmare. But that same night, a different child in another quarter said the same thing. He said he wasn't finished. In the high temple, Salama sat alone, no longer preaching. He had ordered the veil burned, the horses released, the stones where Shamir had died to be scattered in the desert, but something gnawed at him. The scrolls he once read easily now blurred. His hands trembled, and in the silence of prayer he heard something worse than voices. He heard echoes, echoes of a man refusing to die, not in flesh, but in memory. We tore him into pieces, he whispered, but we never buried his name. And then there was the boy, Zion, the mute child who had wandered the temple corridors unnoticed, who had found the blood-written messages, who had copied every word into the hollowed spine of a prayer book. Now he sat alone in a chamber lit only by a single oil lamp, and with a careful hand he opened the book and began to write. They tried to erase him. But I remember how he bled and how he didn't scream. I remember the crown that never fell, only faded. They wanted the silence to be absolute, but silence, when cracked, echoes farther than screams. He was erased, but he was never gone. They called it cleansing, but something still clung to the stones, something red, something human. Weeks passed. No monuments were built, no tomb was marked. Even the square where he was torn was paved over with white stone, spotless, blinding under the desert sun. But every time it rained, the red came back, no matter how many times they scrubbed, no matter how much ash they scattered. Veins of crimson crawled through the cracks like roots reclaiming the earth. In a village far from Karghadan, a traveler paused by a well. A young boy sat nearby, reading aloud from a scroll with no title. The words were strange, rhythmic, like a curse disguised as a memory. They split his body, but not his breath. They burned his name, but not his echo. The traveler asked where he'd learned the verses. The boy simply smiled. From someone who never spoke, but remembered everything. Meanwhile, in the temple, a monk tried to light the ceremonial brazier for the spring equinox, but the flame wouldn't hold. The oil boiled, then bled. Blood seeped from the stone base, real blood, thick and blackened. And a crack echoed through the roof. That night, 5 priests abandoned their posts. One disappeared entirely, Another carved the word Shamir into his own skin before vanishing into the dunes. And Yeria, no one saw her again. But in the old archives, beneath a statue of the prophet, someone found a single item placed with precision. A wooden heart burned down the center, carved with a name. And next to it, the white veil folded perfectly, not burned. Not broken, just left behind. Deep in the catacombs beneath Karghadan, a wall once sealed shut crumbles with time. Inside, stone, cold, silent, and on it, faint red symbols still fresh. They spell one thing: I am still here. They tried to erase a man, but ended up creating a myth. Shamir was no saint. He was proud, reckless, brutal. But in the end, it wasn't his sins that terrified them. It was the idea that he chose to bleed rather than bow. So tell me, what would you choose? To be loved and forgotten, or hated and remembered forever? Leave your thoughts below. And if you believe some stories deserve to be told, even the ones buried in blood, then subscribe. Let's keep the echoes alive.